Welcome, everybody, to the For the Love of Language podcast. I'm EJ.
And I'm Stacy. Hi, friends. We've already had a good time chatting.
Right? And we're going to chat about Deixis today. That's spelled Deixis, Deixis.
Yes. And maybe we'll include a little spoof clip in here, but I always thought you pronounced it as Deixis, like you would like a Pokemon name. But no, apparently it's Deixis. So we're going to go with EJ's pronunciation because EJ knows better than I do in this case.
I learned about Deixis in an actual linguistics class rather than by reading it. So
Yeah.
I heard people say it, and then I just played how DuckDuckGo says it out loud because it's fun. But I don't want to be prescriptive about it. You
It's
can
fine.
say it. I don't want to be prescriptive. You can say it
It's
how you
okay.
want.
It's okay. I mean, I was telling EJ that, there are other words in linguistics that I mispronounce and I just like don't care because I think it sounds better the way I say it. But other people are indeed confused. But for this instance, because this is a public podcast, I will say Deixis, even though I have feelings.
All right. Well,
So
let's
tell
dive
us,
in.
educate us. Yes, EJ, tell us about Deixis.
Well, deixis is actually a somewhat simple concept. It's the idea that you have a word that refers to a referent in the sentence. And so, like, it's a word like maybe a pronoun, or you have things like yesterday or tomorrow that depend on what today is, or even things like that, there, then. Those are all deictic words because they do have like a meaning, but that actual meaning depends on the context, and they refer back to, in linguistic terms, deictic words are sometimes called references, and they refer to a referent that has been, mentioned or is clear from the context of the sentence.
Yeah, there's also a specific word for this phenomenon in semantics, in the field of semantics. Unfortunately, my brain is poo-poo right now, and I can't remember the exact word for it. But it is an interesting phenomenon of like I mean, there are some people who might say, "Oh, but isn't every word like dependent on like the context or something?" But it's a little bit different, right? Like if I'm holding up a mug here and I say, "All right, this is a mug," right? Like this does like the word mug references like a real life thing, but that's a little bit different from Deixis where it's the referent is dependent and can change, right? So if I say I'm looking forward to tomorrow is going to vary, right? Like we're recording this on a Saturday. Right now, tomorrow is Sunday. But if I said I'm looking forward to tomorrow on Sunday, then that means Monday, right? So that kind of variability is what goes around like Deixis. And same as what you said with like pronouns, with like he and her and they, and it all like can kind of switch depending on who you're talking about and how many hers, he's, and theys are all over the place, right?
Yeah. So like deixis and the usage of these references to, meaning that was located elsewhere can end up leading to a lot of, puns, jokes, ambiguity that can lead to a lot of, fun language type games.
Oh yeah. The first one that comes to mind is the who's on first.
What's that?
The who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
I am not familiar with this game.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's like I guess it's more of a poem than a game. But there's like two people having a conversation about the players on their baseball game. And they say, okay, well, who's on first? But is like a name, but it's also
Oh. Mm-hmm.
like a question word. And
Mm-hmm.
so they kind of go about and do a little circular thing of like who's on second, what's on first, no, who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third. And like all of this kind of chaos. And like because there is like this weird break, it leads to like misinterpretation in comedy.
Mm.
But there's also interesting moments of like that in other like games and puzzles and
Right. Yeah, I've definitely run into that kind of joke where you're using the word who as a name of somebody to I just don't think I've heard it with that specific like baseball analogy.
oh
So
yeah, I mean that's a very popular one. I'll have to show you and we can dive into it together sometime.
right. There's like the whole Doctor Who thing, right? That just brings that up over and over again.
Yeah. It's a very interesting thing how based off of reference you can kind of like switch things around, and you can kind of get into like funny little mind problems or mind games,
Mm,
especially with things like tomorrow and today and all this like stuff. You can kind of bend time in your brain and play around with things based on how you're like mentally conceptualizing how things are related to each other, which is
definitely.
ultimately more of what like Deixis or Deixis is more about like what that is. It's less about the thing that you're referring to and more about its relationship to other things and how those
Definitely.
words kind of interconnect is how all these relative words connect.
Right. And it's also interesting because like the reference words like deixis is a little bit different in different languages at times.
Mm-hmm.
So one that we've talked about before is like the words he and she, as far as pronouns, might just be ta in Chinese, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just a single word. You also have, again, in Chinese, where if you're saying, oh, my brother, something, something, you can't just say brother. It has to be older brother or younger brother.
Mm-hmm.
And so you do have like some differences embedded just into the semantics of the deictic words between
Mm-hmm.
languages, which is kind of interesting. One I
Yeah.
really like with time is that in Russian and several other languages, you don't just have words for yesterday and tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
They also have words for the day before yesterday and the day after tomorrow that, obviously we can describe those in English. I just did, but they actually have like individual words for it that's really common to use.
Yeah, one of my favorites is in Arabic. You have words for like describing just like one person or a group of people and then just two people. Like you can inflect something to indicate that it's just two people that you're talking about,
Mm,
as opposed to just like a random mass of any number of people and one person. You can also just talk about two people.
yeah,
And so I think what's interesting about this is these are often the words that people kind of this connects back to like the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis of like, because they're a little bit more culturally like relative and can vary depending on like the culture, people are like, oh, we must conceive of these things differently. So it's, in Chinese, it's not that there is no gender, right? Because they have a singular pronoun, and they don't distinguish their pronoun based on gender, right? There's just the one. That doesn't mean that they don't see gender. To the contrary, right? That just means that they have like a different way of expressing this, right?
definitely.
They're just kind of moving around complexity and kind of stuff like that. So I mean, it may change their perspective a little bit, right? Like I don't often think that I need to reference just two people, right? That's not something that's super common for me. But in certain cultures that might just be something that needs to be communicated more efficiently or effectively so they can use that complexity elsewhere. But yeah, I've often noticed that these kinds of words are often the words that get mixed up in the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis problem of, oh, because this is different, or because they have so many words for this or not enough words for that, that must mean they might think this way.
Right. I actually really like that call out. I think it's a really, really interesting thing.
Yeah, I had a chat with this with my friend yesterday about some stuff in Sumerian, and I was like,
Mm.
I don't know.
Right. And we do have like an entire episode on the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis if you want to go back and listen to more on that. So the thing that actually got me thinking about Deixis and why
Yeah.
I brought it up as a topic for this podcast was actually because I had what felt to me like a weird interaction with it.
Okay. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, and this is like a very, very common thing. But what happened is I was in a conversation with family, right? And so like my mother or mother-in-law or someone older in my family was speaking with me, and my son was also there. And so speaking to my son, my mother says something about, "Oh yeah, talk to mom." And so my own mom was referring to her child as mom when speaking to my son. And
Right.
obviously this is something that happens
Like all the time.
everywhere, all the
Oh yeah.
time.
I've had interactions like that with like my grandmother and my mother, where it's
Hmm.
like it is completely dependent, like who, depending on who's talking, mom is going to be different.
Right. It was just really, really weird for me. And I do, go by mom with my son, but it was really weird for me to have my own mom refer to me as mom when speaking to my son. Like, it
Yeah.
was just a really interesting moment that hadn't ever happened to me before.
Mhm.
And or maybe it had and I just hadn't noticed it, but it just really got me thinking, like, that's interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, it is really interesting because I mean, especially if it is like anything that references you, or might like if there's any kind of like identities that you have with you that can kind of like vary, like sister, brother, sibling, child, parent, all of these like relational terms, right? They vary. They vary depending
Hmm.
on like who's talking. Like me, I have two sisters. So if you say sister, in my family, you're like, okay, well, you got to specify, or, it kind of depends on who you're talking to. Cause like my mother will often refer to me as like sister, but it's like, it's different if like me and my younger sister are like in the same room as to who she's going to refer to as sister. Like it's very interesting. So like relative terms and relational terms between people is like a very common way that you can kind of see these play out.
Right.
But yeah, anything with like time or directions is also going to be like using directions of like north, south, east, west, kitty corner or catty corner, depending on where you're from, to the right, to the left. Those are also things that are very just dependent on your surroundings.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Like the McDonald's on the right is going to be different depending on where you're at, right? Like if there's two
Right.
McDonald's down one street and one of them's on your right, well, are you coming from the north or the south? And which right is it?
I read that there is, and I don't know if this is actually true or not, but I read that there is an Aboriginal language where they don't actually use the deictic references like left and right, but they like speak even about very close things using the cardinal directions
Yes.
north, south, east, and west,
Hmm.
which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, I've heard the same thing.
My husband can do that. Will literally like be inside of an elevator or in some place that has zero way of telling which way is which direction. And my husband can just point and be like, "Oh yeah, that's south." And I'm like, "What?"
How do you know that? Where is this internal compass coming from?
I just know I don't have it.
I don't have it either. I get so lost. Like EJ and I, well, EJ's in Utah right now, and I grew up in Utah. And in Utah, it's very easy to know north, south, east, and west, depending on where the mountains are in relation to you. So
Mhm.
I always like, that's how I learned directions. Like before I was taught that, oh, the mountains are east, I had no clue what east was. I was like, I
Right.
don't know.
And the road system in Utah then uses the grid system where all of the streets are things like 100 south or 300 west. And so you end up really relying on those cardinal directions. And my husband grew up with that. And so that's also much more
Yeah.
ingrained with him than it is with me.
Yeah. But then like when I lived in New York and now that I'm here in California, there are no mountains to reference.
Right. Or if
There
it's
are no
dark
mountains to
outside, or if
reference.
you're
And
inside
I'm
a
like,
building.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I'm like, I
Uh,
don't know where the sun starts, where it ends. Like it's a mystery to me, but some people are really good with that and some cultures are based around that. I mean, you think about if you're out in the bush and there's no mountains, like, and nothing else to really like, or like to like there's no like big buildings or anything to find your bearings. Like, yeah, it makes sense that the cardinal directions would be valuable in terms of like talking about where things are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's super, super interesting. Going back though to like references to people and relationships, I think when I was thinking about like being referred to as mom, like whenever you have something new that like you haven't been referred to as before, it's always a little bit of an adjustment, like, oh, is
Yeah.
that me? Or like if you change your name, or anything like that. And you have examples like in The Simpsons where Homer Simpson is referred to as actually Homer instead of Dad by Bart and Lisa, his children. And I've actually met individuals who also do that in their families, or I've known some people who like if they did something wrong, then maybe they'll actually refer to their parents as like sir and ma'am. So you get lots of interesting different references and different dynamics, even in really similar locations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like in my family, I grew up in a military family, so my it was yes sir, yes ma'am. And like even my father would if my mother needed something, yes ma'am. And it was just like one of those things that you did in my family, but that's definitely not done like for other people. So like family dynamics can vary wildly in terms of how people are referred to.
Yeah, and like in the military or in like the southern US, it's going to be much more common for people to use sir and ma'am than in
Mhm.
like Utah
Yeah.
or the West Coast. It's also somewhat of a regional dialect thing.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's super, super interesting. And it also got me thinking though, like, because these are deictic expressions, they're just like part of our lexicon and the normal way that people reference others, like, how much control do you actually have over how you yourself are referred to, right?
Oh, like absolutely none. I mean, anyone within the queer community who has had to deal with people and pronouns will like understand this of like, yeah, you can request to be referred a certain way, but if you're not around, you have zero control over how people are going to talk about you, which is
Mm,
like it's one of those things that it's like, one of those everyday tragedies, I would say, that we're just kind of used to. There's a company called the School of Life that I really enjoy, and they like talk about this kind of stuff of just like, when you think about it, this is kind of like a sad thing. You're like, you don't fully have control as to how people see you.
yeah.
And realizing that, can lead to a bunch of stuff if you really get into it. And we're not going to get into it because this is not a psychology podcast. But also, it is one of those things like you just don't have control over it.
Yeah, and like I do think this is most common with people that you don't know well. Like I think
Mhm.
if you have expressed your preferences to people and if they're good people, then they will refer to you the way that you want to be referred to, even if you're not present. And a lot of people will try to present a certain way to be referred to the way they want to, especially when it comes to gendered terms.
But even like gender terms aside, right? Like you could say that someone is your friend, your best friend, your acquaintance. They might
Mm-hmm.
refer to you differently, but you wouldn't
Right.
know that unless you like get together and they like introduce you as, oh, this is my acquaintance, Stacey, and you're like, oh, I thought we were besties. But it turns out I'm just a loose acquaintance. That hurts my heart a little bit. But yeah, like there's also situations like that, like other relational terms with like friendship and how people are
Mhm.
connected that way as well. Again, that's
Yeah.
like not something that you really know or have control over how people refer to you as like, my friend, my roommate, my sister's cousin's husband, or whatever.
Yeah. And I've actually had like conversations with my husband about like, well, which of the endearing terms do you actually like? Like, are there any of them that you hate and that I shouldn't use? But I always find it really cool when I have friends that will refer to their partner as like my love or my soulmate. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's so romantic and so sweet. And I wish that more people would be a little bit more expressive in their,
Yeah.
terms of endearment in some ways.
Oh yeah.
But
In my neighborhood, there was this like cute old guy, and he'd always refer to his wife as his sweetheart. And so
mm.
he'd be like, my sweetheart this, my sweetheart that, instead of like my wife. And I was like, "Ah, that.
Right? It's super, super interesting. I feel like a more recent one is the term wifey has gained like different connotations recently.
I'm not a big fan of that one personally. I don't know, it just feels weird.
I'm not personally either. I would
I'm
not
like
want
the
to be referred
whole
to that
hubby,
way.
wifey. I'm like,
But I know a lot of people really love it and find it really endearing. And
yeah.
I do think a big thing is the intention behind
Yes.
the word, the way that it's used. Because you can have some words that could be a really good thing or a really bad thing, depending on the context.
Hmm.
But it is also important to take into account people's personal preferences, especially if you are speaking about or to them.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
super, super interesting.
Absolutely. These kinds of words are fluid, and that's, I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna just make one other point here. This is one of those things that makes it hard for like artificial intelligences and other like computational stuff to like work properly, because some of these terms are so fluid, right?
Mhm.
Like having computational models try to work with these types of relational stuff, it can be kind of complex. And it's one of those things that often they just kind of build into memory of like, okay, this person has these titles,
Mhm.
but like it's so much different than just like learning a list of titles associated to like one person.
Yeah,
Like it's so much more complex in like linguistic reality that we haven't quite been able to figure out how to fully embed in like a computational model of language.
definitely.
So it's, yeah, it's very interesting.
That's something that I've seen a lot in machine translation, which has progressed a ton in the last decade for sure.
Yeah.
But especially if there is a difference between languages and what information is required. So, for
Yeah.
example, in Spanish, where so many nouns and adjectives are gendered, if you're going from English to Spanish and you want to say something about my friend, I haven't done this super recently, but in the past, whenever I did, it would always default to the masculine.
Hmm.
And so it would be mi amigo instead of mi amiga, if you were referring to a friend that is a woman. And like that kind of thing, it's the same with what Stacey was just saying about, AI bots or anything else. You need to truly understand the context and the meaning, the connotations of everything that you're saying in order to generate something that actually is accurate and makes sense. So even if you have like an AI bot that works perfectly in one language or in one context, it might totally fail in another context. And that actually
Yeah.
happens as well with humans learning language. Like,
Hmm.
if you only learn how to talk about math in Spanish, you're going to be really good about talking about math, but you're not going to be good at, watching a sitcom and understanding what's going on, right? It's
Hmm.
just totally different things.
Yeah, but it is, yeah, it's really interesting. And going back to like the translation, another example is like in Portuguese when you say thank you. In
Mm.
Portuguese, when you say thank you, it's obrigado or obrigada, depending on who you are. So, like,
As the speaker.
I would use obrigada because I identify as a female person. So I will use the feminine form of thank you.
And I will always be extremely conflicted because I don't want to say obrigada. I'd rather say obrigado. But if I say obrigado, then people are going to be confused.
We just have to wait for more inclusive language to come up. But anyway, that's something that if you type into Google Translate, Google's not going to know how you identify or what version of thank you want to use, because that is you. It has no way of like seeing who you are and choosing the right form for you. So you have to be aware of that. And so there's like no way. I mean, there may be a way eventually to be like, hey, I identify as this. So you can like, if so for these translations, you can give me that. But like that's something again that the system would have to memorize and like learn in some weird way, and it can't just poop it out for you and it be correct.
So I just wanted to test this out and see what happens. So I went to translate.google.com and
Mm-hmm.
typed in thank you into Portuguese. And right now it's actually giving me obrigada.
Oh, interesting. I've gotten the masculine version a couple times.
Yeah, I mean, you get, and that's the thing. It's not the best at always displaying the options and
Yeah.
letting you say like, oh, this is the one that I would want. Because if I put in my friend in English to Spanish, right now it's actually telling me translations are gender specific. It just told me that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's giving me the options mi amiga with feminine in parentheses and mi amigo with masculine in parentheses. So Google has
Mm.
actually improved since when I last tried this,
Yeah.
which is awesome. I'm glad that they are showing multiple options. But if I make this a little bit more complex, I'm going to try typing in my friend is a software engineer. And it actually is still giving me that full phrase in both options,
That's
which
really
is really,
interesting.
really cool. So they're
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
better. I'm really
They are
excited.
getting
This
better.
is way better than the last time that I tried. So way to
Yeah.
go, Google.
Yeah, it is really interesting though that you only get the feminine version of thank you. But what's tricky about that one is you can't just say masculine or feminine, because people might interpret that as being like, oh, if I'm saying thank you to a masculine person, I will say obrigado. If I'm saying thank you to a feminine person, obrigada. Like it's something that you have to know. It's a nuance that I don't know if Google has a way to like explain succinctly that the version that you use refers to yourself and not to the other person. Whereas in like other instances of gendered words, usually it's just referring to whatever the other thing is, and that is gender dependent. But it's not like it's kind of rare to have something change based on like how you're referring to yourself. So it's a very
Right.
interesting, it's an interesting little conundrum, but it looks like they're trying to tackle it a little bit at a time.
Yeah, so I just tested that because Russian also has that thing
Yeah.
where specifically verbs in the past tense will change depending on the speaker's gender.
Mm-hmm.
And while in Spanish, when I tried a few things, Google was fantastic and actually showed me both gendered variations, one on top of the other. When I do the same thing and I type, I went to the store from English to Russian, it's only showing me the masculine version. But since they've already done that and made those changes for Spanish, I'm assuming that they will eventually expand that out into other languages as well, which is super cool.
Yeah.
But back to our original point, there is still a ton of complexity there.
Yeah, these are the kinds of things that linguists like to study because they're the interesting parts, and this is where you can embed a lot of complexity in languages, and it gets it gets kind of funky.
Yeah, it's super, super interesting. So that was a really fun little conversation about
Yeah.
Deixis. Is there anything else that you would like to dive into?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of different bases. And I guess like the point of this episode is just like, yeah, these are kind of weird things that we often don't think about until we're kind of like confronted with some of these like oppositions in like references, and we get a little confused or tripped up, but they're an integral part of language, and every language has them, but they may just look different depending on like cultural context and all these other things.
Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed our conversation about Deixis and the different ways that different languages touch on it and whatnot. If you have any comments, any questions, any topics that you would like us to cover, please reach out on Instagram at For the Love of Language, and we'd really love to hear from you.
Yeah, feel free to pop on by.
See you next time.
See ya.